Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Jenna and I do something a little bit different here on my channel. So basically I do my makeup while I talk about a true crime case that has recently interested me. That sounds bad, doesn't it? So I'm not a makeup artist, but I like makeup. I'm not a detective, but I'm interested in true crime. Put it all together and that's me. So today's case is about the murder of Yara Gambirasio. Gambirasio. Again, I don't know why I do it to myself, but this case is based in Italy, so I really try my best to pronounce these words properly, and I go on Google and I try to find out how they're pronounced, but I am just terrible. So I apologise if I get it wrong, and I'm going to try my best to get everything right. Also, a lot of the sources that I looked at are obviously written in Italian, so the news articles, yeah, they're all written in Italian, and when I tried to Google Translate, it didn't always come out right. A lot of it didn't even make any sense at all, so if I've made any mistakes in this, again, I apologise. Lastly, I want to add a quick disclaimer to my videos now and just say that I mean absolutely no offence to anybody I talk about in these videos, and I've just compiled information I found from various sources into one video. So now all of that's been said, let's just get on with the video. Yara Gambirasio was born on the 21st of May 1997 and was just 13 years old when this story takes place. She lived in a place called Brembit de Sopra, and it was a fairly small, picturesque town with around 8,000 occupants. It was quite a lovely, humble, kind of still traditional place to live. Yara had a normal family life. Her father, Fulvio, was an architect and her mother, Maura, was a teacher. Yara also had an older sister named Kaba, who was 15 years old, and she also had two younger brothers who were under the age of 10, so I'm not going to say their names. Yara was a bright 13-year-old girl who she just loved gymnastics. That was her thing. She spent most of her time at competitions or classes, and her life revolved around gymnastics really. On Friday the 16th of November, Yara went missing. At 5:15 she left her house to walk to her gym, which was only actually a few hundred metres away from her house, and she went there to drop off a stereo. Her gym was kind of like a leisure centre, so there was a larger sports hall, which is where Yara did her gymnastics, but there was also like a swimming complex, a running track. It was just quite a big place, and it had lots of entrances and exits. It got to 7 p.m. and Yara still wasn't home, so by this point her parents had started to worry, and at 7:11 p.m. Yara's mother, Maura, decided to call her mobile and there was no reply. It went straight to voicemail. A little while later, Yara's father decided that it was time to call the police. The call was put straight through to the prosecutor's office in Bergamo, which was a city about 11 kilometres away. I don't think it works it works here, for example. You go through to a dispatcher and then, you know what, I don't even know I've never called the police, so I don't really know what happens. But all I know is it's different in Italy to what we think it would be. So the magistrate on duty that night, and who would now be in charge of Yara's case, was a woman named Letizia Ruggeri. I'm so sorry, I hope I get that right. She dispatched both the state police and the Carabinieri, I think it's called, which is the military police. They all arrived at Yara's house within minutes. They were very quick. Ruggeri was a tough woman. She was a former police officer and she had nearly 20 years experience of being a magistrate. She herself had a young daughter, similar to Yara's age, and she did everything she possibly could in this case. It became clear pretty quickly that Yara's family had nothing to do with this, but they investigated them anyway, which they should, but yeah, they investigated them anyway. They interviewed all of Yara's family and extended family. They even wiretapped the family's phones just to, keep an eye, see if they say anything, and like I said, they were cleared pretty quickly. It was obvious from the get-go that they had nothing to do with this. Yara's gym instructor confirmed that she was at the gym and she had dropped the stereo off, she did some light training, and then she set off to go home. Yara's phone records show that her last text that she sent was to her friend Martina at 6:44 p.m, and she was agreeing to meet up with her the following Sunday. Why will you not blend? Not only did this kind of let police know what Yara's movements were and what she was doing, but it also solidified what they already thought, and that Yara wasn't a runaway. Because obviously if she's making plans to see her friend the following week, she's not planning to run away. This text was actually the last that anyone heard from Yara. Tracker dogs were called in to trace Yara's last movements, and instead of going the expected route back to Yara's home, the dogs actually went in the opposite direction towards a place called Mapello. It seems that Yara didn't even get to attempt to walk home. When authorities analysed Yara's phone records, it showed that the phone was registered as present in Mapello at 6:49 p.m, which is literally like 5 minutes after she had sent the text to her friend Martina. As well as Yara's family's phones being wiretapped, Ruggiero ordered hundreds more phones to be wiretapped. This was of anyone in the area deemed to be suspicious. They also tried to trace every handset, so every mobile, of everyone that had travelled through or passed through Mapello, and this was said to be about 15,000 phones. One of these phones belonged to a man named Mohammed Fikri. One of the conversations that the authorities had taped in late November, a translator or an interpreter had said that they had heard the phrase, "Forgive me, God, I didn't kill her." Mohammed was a builder in Mapello at the time of Yara's death. By the time that police, sprung into action, Mohammed was actually on a boat on the way to Tangiers. Police intercepted this boat though, and on the 4th of December they arrested Mohammed. It didn't look good for him actually, because the van that he was using around that time was searched by police, and they found a mattress inside and it had blood on it. The public really wanted this to be the man. They wanted Mohammed to be the killer because he was a foreigner, he was an outsider. It meant that it wasn't someone within their community that had done this, so they really wanted it to be Mohammed. Soon after though Mohammed was actually cleared, it was said that the blood on the mattress wasn't Yara's, and although they didn't release whose blood it was, I'm guessing that if it wasn't suspicious and they just let him go, it must have been his own blood. Also though, the interpreter had actually got it wrong and it was mistranslated, so the phrase that they thought he actually said, he never said. The public were really not happy with this, and there was actually outrage, open outrage at him being let go. This is actually terrible. I'm trying a new palette and it's really bad. Wow, terrible. Unless it's just me that's terrible. Yara's family were very private and they only actually gave, I think it was one press conference or press release, and they did give the press some photographs of Yara to try and get her face and her name out there. But apart from this, they stayed very, very private compared to what a lot of families do. A lot of families, they're out doing, not protests, what you call them, processions, lots of press conferences, but no, Yara's family, they just wanted to be left alone. 3 months later, exactly, on the 26th of February 2011, a man named Ilario Scotti was flying his remote control plane. He was flying it over an overgrown field in a place called Cignolo di Sola. This was about 10 kilometres away. His plane was malfunctioning and he decided he would set it down in the long grass and he would go over and get it. As he went to get his plane, he went into the long grass and he saw what he thought was a bunch of rags on the floor, and You know what it's like, you go into fields and a lot of the time people just dump their rubbish, they flight it, they just dump it in there. So he just assumed that that's what it was. It was only when he saw a pair of shoes that he realised actually he was looking at the body of a young girl. He immediately called the police and he started to walk away from the body, but when he turned around just to look again, he saw that he couldn't see the body anymore, and he panicked and he ran straight back over to it and stayed beside the body until the police got there so that they could easily find them. Police had actually searched the field previously, but they never came across anything because the state of the field was so overgrown that they just didn't find anything. As soon as Ruggiero arrived at the scene, she knew straight away that she was looking at the body of Yara. This was because she was wearing the same clothes. She was wearing a black bomber jacket and some leggings. Crime investigators also found her iPod and her house keys. Close by, police found Yara's phone SIM card and her battery, but her phone was nowhere to be found. Yara's autopsy took 2 days, and they also put her in a CAT scanner so that they could get a full 3D look at what happened to her. Yara wasn't raped or sexually assaulted, but her bra was unhooked, so this made authorities think that maybe sexual assault was the motive, but that, you know, maybe Yara fought back, and this made it difficult for her attacker to truly do what he wanted to do. Yara had several injuries all over her body, and this came from a sharp weapon, most probably a knife. She had these all over her body, on her chest, her back, her neck, her wrists, and she also had some head injuries. None of these, though, were actually the cause of her death, meaning that she was alive throughout the whole attack. Yara's actual cause of death was hypothermia due to exposure, so she was just left there in the cold to die. Yara's approximate time of death was around midnight. They originally thought that her body was dumped there, but after closer inspection they saw that she had clumps of grass in her hands, which meant that she would have been alive at the time of her attack, and she would have been clutching at the grass around her. So that kind of confirmed to them that she died in the field. There were traces of lime and jute in her system, and jute is, I think it's a fibre used to make rope. I think that's what it is. So that kind of said to authorities that the person they could be looking for is probably someone who worked within the building trade. A little while later, in April of 2011, there was DNA found in Yara's underwear that didn't belong to her. This was pretty much the biggest breakthrough in the case. Authorities named this, I think it's Egnito 1, which means unknown one, so that's what I'm going to call them. Specialists could tell in this DNA that there was a 94.5% chance of this person having piercing blue or piercing green eyes. Like, you know when you see those people and they have such light coloured eyes, they're piercing. It was also said that he would have very strong family ties in the area, so likely his family still lived in the area. In Italy, there's no national DNA database like we have in the UK, so they were pretty much starting from scratch. They start with testing Yara's friends and their parents, her school friends and their parents, her gymnastic friends and their parents, and anyone that had ever stepped foot in the sports complex, whether they were linked to Yara or not. Just as many people as they could. By this point, they weren't just looking at individuals, they were looking at the Y chromosome. Now, in the simplest terms and the best way I can describe it, the Y chromosome is practically unchanged when it passes down the male line, so a grandson will have the exact same Y chromosome as his grandfather. Because of this, they can actually trace distant relatives all through this Y chromosome, so they started focusing on that. Sorry, that's like the best way I could simply describe it, so if you're cringing at my science right now, I'm sorry. So they were looking at this chromosome and they were trying to match what they found on Yara, unknown one, to anybody they could find. In October of 2011, they found a match. So police had actually taken to taking samples, DNA samples, outside a local nightclub because it was quite close to where Yara's body was found. So when people were waiting in line on a Friday and Saturday night and it was busy, they were taking people's DNA samples. One of these samples, the matching one, belonged to Damiano Giranoni, although Damiano was not a complete match. He was also out of the country in South America at the time of Yara's death, but they knew that the killer had to be related to Damiano, whether that be closely related or distantly related. By the way, I put some eyelashes on to try and save this look. I don't know. So they started interviewing his family, and they started with his mother because his father had actually passed away. So you can't understand me, can you, from talking like this? His father had actually passed away years prior. So the mother's name was Aurora Zani, and when interviewing her, they actually found out that she used to be the housemaid for Yara's family for 10 years. She was devastated to be linked to this case because she adored Yara. She watched her grow up, so yeah, she was devastated to be linked to this case. The family's phones were wiretapped, and nothing ever came of this. They literally had nothing to do with it, but you know, it still remained that they were related to the killer. Specialists they made up a massive family tree of this family, and they went all the way back to the early 1800s. They found that the family mainly resides in a place called Gorno, which was a small town about 45 kilometres away. It was a fairly small place, and the Giranoni family was quite like a well-known big family in the area. Authorities started taking DNA samples from everyone in the area with that surname, you know, the one I can't pronounce. They eventually came across a man called Pierpaolo, and he was a 50% match. This would make him most likely the brother of the killer. Pierpaolo had one brother, and he was a drug addict called Diego, and he also wasn't a 50% match. The authorities decided they needed a DNA sample of their father, a man called Giuseppe, but he had died in 1999, so this was going to prove quite difficult. They went to the mother, a lady named Laura. So Laura talked to the authorities and said that she really didn't think that Giuseppe ever had any affairs. There were no signs, and that they just had their 3 children. She also gave the authorities some personal belongings of Giuseppe's because they wanted to try and find any DNA they could from him, but bearing in mind this was 12 years after he actually died, so you know, it was a slim chance. However, they did actually find some DNA on some postage stamps that he had licked in previous years. Through this DNA that they found, they were able to make a full DNA profile, and it was found that the DNA of Giuseppe matched exactly to the DNA of unknown one. The police came to the only reasonable conclusion that Giuseppe had an affair and he has an illegitimate son out there somewhere. Giuseppe was a local bus driver, and he would often pick up women from their homes and take them to their local place of work, which was usually a textile factory. So he was meeting a lot of young women on a daily basis. When authorities interviewed some of his old colleagues, they said that he was a right ladies' man, and that they weren't surprised if affairs were going on at the time. Other than this, they couldn't really get much more information because this was like a religious village. They didn't want to gossip, and especially about someone who has passed away. Authorities were now looking for an unknown woman, probably slightly older, who 30 to 40 years ago had an affair with a married man and gave birth to a son. So that's quite a difficult thing to find out because it's not really something you'd want to share, is it? This kind of started to fizzle out, and at the end of 2013 it was decided that the case had to close. They didn't have anything else. Ruggiero, the magistrate in charge, she just felt like she couldn't let it go. She had made a promise to Yara's mum that she would find the killer, and she felt like there was something left that she could do. So she turned to 2 DNA specialists at the University of Pavia, and they managed to identify something that would completely save this case. They identified some kind of genetic mutation in unknown one's DNA. They tried to see if Giuseppe's DNA had this, and it didn't, so the DNA had to come from the mother. At this point, there were around 500 possible mothers, and they had to test them all. They had to see if they had this genetic mutation. Eventually, in woman 321, they found a match. This was a woman named Esther Arzufi. They decided to take this woman's DNA and compare it to unknown one fully, and on every single marker possible, it was a match. This was 100% the mother of the killer. Esther actually used to live on the same street as Giuseppe and his family with her husband and her children. She had twins, a male and female, and another younger son. The twins were born in 1970, and this fit the timeline that authorities were going by. The son was 42 years old and his name was Massimo Bossotti. He had piercing blue eyes and his nickname amongst friends was the Animal. Authorities wanted to find out literally everything about him, so his routine, who he hung out with, just everything. So then a few days later, I can feel my eyelash coming off. A few days later, they set up a roadblock. This was under the pretense of stopping drunk drivers and breathalyzing people. And this was actually a really clever idea, because when Massimo came along with his family, he had his family in the car. He came along, they breathalyzed him, and the officer doing it said, "Oh, it hasn't worked, let me try again." So he took the plastic thing off and put it in a plastic bag, tucked it away, and then tried another one and said, "No, you're fine, you can go, sir." But he had the plastic thing with his DNA on it. That's genius. So then that was rushed up to the lab as quickly as they could. They tested it against unknown one's DNA and it was a match. 100% match. Authorities really quickly tried to track him down and went to his place of work, followed him and arrested him on his building site. Him and his family maintain to this day that he is innocent, and also the mother denies ever having an affair with Giuseppe. She says that all three of her children are her husband's Giovanni. This obviously isn't true because DNA doesn't lie. What's also quite sad as well though is her son Fabio, the younger one, isn't Giovanni's son either, so she had actually had another affair and Giovanni wasn't the father of that child either. That's really sad. None of your children are actually yours because your wife had affairs. The trial started in 2016 and on the 1st of July 2016, Massimo was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Yara. As well as DNA evidence, the prosecution brought up that he had a bad internet history and his phone records showed that he was in the area where Yara died at the time of her death. The defence team gave it a good go defending him and said that all evidence was only circumstantial evidence and that he had been set up. Yara is buried in a white coffin and she has been placed in between both of her grandparents. This is obviously such a really sad story, but an amazing kind of example of what police work really can do. It's amazing that that little tiny piece of DNA did all of this, or that it didn't do it, the people did, but still, it's amazing. So I hope you enjoyed this week's video. It was a little bit complicated in some parts. I hope I explained it properly. Because, you know, I get a bit confused sometimes doing these cases, but hopefully it came across right. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel if you are not already, and I will see you in next week's video.